Welcome back to the Health Insurance Uncovered broadcast. A quick apology for any technical issues you may have experienced during the coffee break, but that's how you know it's live. Now, our next guest in the studio this morning is Dr. Keith Clintworth, Managing Director of Vitality Health, who's here to discuss Prevention 2.0. Keith, thank you very much for coming in to join us this morning. Now, prevention or preventative has become a huge buzzword in the PMI and health insurance space, and I think a good starting point for us this morning is to talk about what we really mean by this, because sometimes these buzzwords become a little bit distorted from what they actually mean.
So I think as prevention is evolving in the market, you needed to start and focus on the lifestyle risk factors as a key starting point. But that now needs to evolve. You need to start evidencing the benefit of these engagement in lifestyle changes actually is evidencing in better outcome costs. And I think Carl alluded to some of that in his previous talk, I think. But the evolution of prevention needs to also then focus on the clinical risk factors, which more can be done in that space, whether it's diabetes or cardiac risk or whatever, but helping people live healthily with their chronic condition is imperative. And then I guess linked to that is the broader topic of screening, and it's not only cancer screening, but that is an important facet of it. And then really the third key component to how we're evolving Prevention 2.0 or Prevention 360 is now taking the member through their whole healthcare journey, and with the ambition to get them back to the best state of healthcare that they could be in order to live with the chronic condition or the cancer or whatever else they have. So that we are at a higher starting point, and that ultimately will reduce healthcare costs long term.
Mm-hmm. So you said, Prevention 2.0, that's what we're here to discuss. Now, obviously, this is something that is quite unique to Vitality. So can you give us a bit more insight about how this works in practice, or what this means beyond, say, the way others in the industry are looking at prevention?
Well, I think we've been on the journey a lot longer, and you've got to start somewhere. And if I just reflect back on our journey, you started with understanding your health and understanding your risk factors, which is imperative. So it's not only doing a health review questionnaire and understanding have you lost any life years, but then also being a little more in tune with your body, and therefore an annual MOT derives some of that type of benefit because it creates awareness. You then need to set up a program which addresses lifestyle factors. And why do we focus on lifestyle factors? Well, that's where we know most of the preventative, the caseload that is in the UK, for example, is probably 50% is as a result of preventable conditions, of which 88% are probably in the lifestyle factor, in this lifestyle group. So therefore, that needs to have the focus of attention. And the key lifestyle ones that we identified and worked with was exercise was core to everything. Nutrition, mental well-being, all of those lifestyle factors were important. But then you need to evolve a broad base of appeal for your activity, because, all very well having a gym member, but we're not all gym members. So therefore, how do you have a broad base of appeal? And then really the secret sauce that we've been working on for many years, which is now known, is the Behavioural Incentive Reward Program. Without that, you can add on all these activities, but are you really going to change behaviours? And that's the challenge, and that's the evolution of prevention through this behavioural incentive program.
Mm-hmm. So taking all that into context, how does that all feed into the clinical side of PMI beyond the more sort of general well-being approach?
So I think, this is, as an industry, addressing lifestyle risk factors is imperative, because as I alluded to in the UK, if we can reduce that burden of disease as the private sector, that has significant benefits for the NHS overall. And I guess where a lot of people are still concerned about, or where maybe we did start 25, 30 years ago, was a little bit of a wish and a prayer that invest today in prevention and the returns will come. And we are now evidencing that. So, I'm always hopeful that the market follows, because I do believe, and the evidence has shown, that this is the right way to do. And I guess teaching and educating even public sector, and not least of all the NHS, but public sector faces the same challenges worldwide. You can't continually invest in care. You need to also have an allocation of funding and budget into prevention. Mm-hmm. And PMI can lead in that market.
Mm-hmm. So when we look at elements around clinical screening, for example, feeding into this clinical side, in your view, where does this need to develop further to help attain some of these goals you've kind of touched upon?
So I think as a group, and the Vitality Group broader globally, is we've been very, very consistent in our message that this has to be evidence-based. And therefore, the screening programs that we roll out align to best practice or evidence that this is the right thing to do. The one conflict, I guess, is with annual MOT checks. Because how do you measure that behavioural change of you having an annual check and what that does in you identifying disease a lot earlier? Because the evidence will show you don't need annual glucose or cholesterol or blood pressure check. You know, many of this is 3 to 5 years. But and that's population screening. But I think within private, we can do something a little bit more different with screening. So those health MOTs is an imperative to start with. I guess the next big component of screening then evolves in disease management and identification. And even when I look back into 2015, our population screening for skin conditions has been pretty poor. But I needed a digital ease of journey for doing that. And I partnered with Skin Analytics, and it's been an amazing journey. And they've just been registered as the first AI digital healthcare company, which implies that any photograph that is taken from any mobile device gets uploaded, and a computer AI assesses whether you're at risk for melanoma, whether it needs to be observed, or whether there's nothing to worry about. And that in the population screening level is imperative. And the NHS have now bought into that as well, and it's driving significant benefits for skin. I think within cancer, we are, as a collective health industry, public and private, we are well ahead of the curve. And cancer screening through genetics and those things most private providers now provide. I guess the challenge that I still see in population screening is, and the sadness of what happened yesterday with the death of our champion for bowel cancer, is bowel cancer affects any age group. And therefore, it's all very well to have population screening to check for your alcohol stool blood content from the age of 60 or down to 50 in some PCT trusts. But actually, how do we use personalization, big data, to identify members who are at higher risk and nudge and encourage them and fund them to have their test done a lot earlier? And so we partnered with Check for Cancers in order to do a little bit, improved cancer screening for cervical smearing as a good example, and to offer fit tests or remove the barriers to entry for people to have alcohol stool tests. But we will continue to evolve and develop in that field. Mm-hmm.
And just staying quickly on this clinical side of things, I mean, you've mentioned a few examples there of how this is evolving and developing as part of this 2.0 prevention side of things. How important, how vital is this advancement in technology to facilitate this? Because you've given a really good example there of how AI is being used at scale.
Yep.
Because is this the driving force here for some of these developments, do you think?
Absolutely, and it removes the cost. And even if you just look in the world of genomics and gene therapies and gene screening and all of these new tests that are coming out, unfortunately, it's a little bit of a conflict that a lot of the evidence isn't through yet, but you've got to start somewhere and build longitudinal analysis. And then what that empowers is use of technology to drive down cost and have a broader base of access. Mm-hmm. So, I'm optimistic that this is the world, and a lot of people are working on this. So some positive things coming in the future, hopefully.
Good. Okay, so moving away from clinical side of things and more towards sort of the treatment, the care side of things, and let's look at rehabilitation, for example. I mean, what are the implications of what we've been discussing so far on that side, that rehab side, that helps people not just get better, but back to sort of prime health and well-being, let's say?
Yeah, and I think, as a clinician myself, I reflect back on my 40 years of working, and I think I was really effective in treating the condition. I was less effective in treating the person. And that can be our role as insurers and funders of healthcare, in the essence of, the evidence is strong that if you are living with cancer or undergoing treatment for cancer, the success of your outcome is depicted on your baseline health firstly. So prevention plays a real vital point to improve your starting point. But even despite that, you can improve people's baseline health. And and we hunted far and wide, and eventually found OncoHealth, which is we're using for our cancer people. But when you start your cancer treatment, you partner with Onco, and it's this exercise coaching, it's nutritional coaching, it's stress management coaching, it's the need for physio when it's relevant and appropriate. But you continue the journey with a third party and with coaches to get you to the best state of health that you can be. And and I'm really optimistic that the lapse rates, these are obviously longitudinal, long lengths of time we need into evidence and to prove this, but we're starting somewhere to try and with the belief that this is the right thing to do.
Now that's interesting. It kind of feeds back into some of the statistics that Carl was talking about earlier. And one that I didn't unfortunately get time to ask about was about the ratio that men use, say, physio services compared to, say, the talking therapies piece. And it's not surprising really if we look at things from a step back. But it's interesting to see how that's those wellbeing pieces are being linked together as part of that 2.0 approach. And I would assume that hopefully that is aimed at driving, some of these men who are more comfortable with the physical side to seeking that mental health support as well, for that whole well-being piece.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I launched our rehab program at Champneys. A woman who was recovering from breast cancer would go to Champneys and have an intensive 3-day coaching experience with other cancer sufferers, and their sense of community was incredible. And we've now extended it to men and all cancers. And the uptake from the men has been surprising. I didn't think they would go. It's not, do we associate ourselves wanting to go to a health spa for recovery, but actually this is a new world. But that doesn't mean we mustn't be focusing on those who don't want to go, and we've got to find other solutions and attractions for that cohort. So it's really segmentation is as imperative in 2.0, prevention 2.0, that it's not a blanket one size fits all. You've got to segment out and understand your target market.
And that leads in very nicely to my next question, which is around personalisation, individualisation. And obviously, we sort of touched on this a bit earlier on. Again, this is a big movement at the moment for the PMI and health insurance space. With this customer-first approach, you need to be able to tailor your service to what a customer needs, and I think that is coming through quite well from the industry at the moment. But how does it? Can you give us a bit more insight into how this fits into what you're talking about from a vitality perspective?
Absolutely. If you look at the triggers, it's great to have the positive selection of people who want to look after their health will potentially join us. But there's also a whole chunk of people who just get selected the PMI. It's not their personal choice, and therefore, what do I do with that market? And so our initial focus has been on what we've termed next best action, which is looking at those key lifestyle journeys that we can understand about you, and what is the benefit that's going to resonate with you, or the reward that's going to resonate with you. And this has now evolved out into something a lot more complex, and has been interesting on our early data where I put the hypothesis, if we focus on the condition that's a consequence of the lifestyle or the clinical risk factor, will that change behaviours more? And we've been trialling it in type 2 diabetes. And we know, and the NHS is trying to drive this as well, and how do we reverse type 2 diabetes? So it's less of a focus on telling someone who's overweight, you need to lose weight by eating well. They know that. Or you need to exercise. They know that. They just don't know how to start. But if you say to them, let's focus on reversing your type 2 diabetes, and this is what it will mean for you, I think that unlocks so much more opportunities. So we partnered with Second Nature, and the early results are really looking impressive. The ambition is to reverse 50% of type 2 diabetes. We're currently at about 40% of those people who've engaged. But the more exciting fact, and this has been going for a couple of years now, but Second Nature's data is clearly showing that people who have reversed their type 2 diabetes through activity and healthy eating actually sustain their physical activity 36% higher than what they did pre. And that's the proof of the pudding, So, but all of these programs for us, and if I look at the NHS will put in Second Nature, we'll put in Second Nature, what's the difference? Well, ours is linked to a behavioural incentive. And I'm now trying to evidence, well, does that behavioural incentive drive better outcomes, better results? And I intuitively believe it does. And the evidence, we'll share that evidence with the market once we start getting that in.
And yeah, the incentivization obviously has always been sort of a core part of the Vitality proposition, and others that have come to market as well. And I think one of your colleagues came in to our Wellbeing conference earlier this year to talk about that behavioural analytics side of things, the data of how you achieve true incentivization on an almost individual level, but using big data, using scale. And that's no easy task, obviously, and it's something, as you've said, that takes years to develop. I mean, so it's a silly change, isn't it, from what we used to see, where you'd get very standard one-size-fits-all benefits of, oh, you can have a gym membership or a discount on your train ticket, for example, or a bike membership, for want of a better word. I mean, how do you see that moving forward from where you sit, from what you see? Is there a direction of travel, or do you think it is very much one of these things that has to be developed slowly?
I'm not into slowly, but I'm into it needs to be segmented and enhanced and developed as you go. Mm-hmm. You've got to, and as I said early on, defining what that starting point is, and what's fascinating with wellness, and I think we need to be cognizant of it, is that illness, the cost of illness is known at the time. Your impact to you, your family, your bank balance, etc., is known, it's visible. Mm-hmm. The benefit of wellness is far down the line. And we're all guilty of this. We live for the moment. And not saying you shouldn't live for the moment, but actually, and pension and all the other challenges of saving, we're not good at that as humans in planning for the future. And, do you use the scare tactics of healthy living years? And, I think for me, and as I'm getting older, obviously, the last thing I want to know is I'm going to spend my last 10 years in ill health. We all want to just drop down dead, but at a decent age when you've achieved all you want to do. But that's, we'd have no control over that. But I do have control over my healthy living years. But the complexity of the big data challenge comes from verifiable data. Mm-hmm. So, you need to unlock those barriers to entry, and gym membership discounts and all of that is a great starting point, offering discounts on fit devices, et cetera, And that broad base of appeal is the big challenge, because gym, cycle, swimming, tennis, golf, walk-in, you've got to appease that whole segment. Mm-hmm. And that becomes part of the challenge, because in order to then drive and include a behavioural incentive program, it needs to be verifiable data. And cycling for us has been our challenge, in that how do you get verifiable cycling data? Step activity, we all learned in the early days, and I learned this from the hard way of my little step device. It could do 3 tumble dryer washes, and I would get a whole lot of steps before it died and needed to be replaced, or putting it on the dog. We've all heard these stories. Apple Watch has really revolutionized that for us, as is Garmin and Polo and all these other devices are a lot better. But you've then got to integrate all that data and analyze it. Mm-hmm. So data lakes and algorithms, data science architects in order to devise the algorithms, and then you need personalization engines in order to make the experience relevant and appropriate. So all that has to happen in tandem to all of the other things that you're doing. But then, to actually evolve this into the complete next level is really that activity-based data, the personalization, the nudges. So if you're doing 7,000 steps 3 times a week, that's brilliant, great start. But you probably need some heart rate activity as well to really improve your healthy life years. So how do you then nudge onto that complete next level? But, and then ultimately, and this is what I always bring it back to, show me the data, evidence that this is benefiting. And we now, we're well into that place, and it does work. Mm-hmm.
No, I think that's a nice lead into one of the audience questions we've had from there, and please do submit your questions for Keith. We have a few minutes left with him this morning. So the question is, what do you think that incentivization schemes are so effective to help engage people with healthier lifestyles? And I think perhaps you might have just answered that question there. But what would you point to say, like, this is why, this is how and why it works?
I don't think there's one answer for that, to be really simplistic. Behavioural change is so complex. And, whether we frame things differently or whether we're really into loss aversion. And one of the interesting things when we did activity-based rewards, which was giving the Starbucks at that time, now Cafe Nero coffee, and the cinema codes, it was met with cynicism across the market. What's coffee got to do with wellness? But in fact, it was a nudge to get people to sustain their activity. But however, there's a whole group of our members who don't use any of the rewards, but it's about loss aversion. They want to know they've earned it. They don't need to always claim it, but they want to tick their box. And you know, the world that Apple Watch plays and closing of the rings and all that, if those of us who are Apple Watch avid users, it frustrates us when we're not closing our rings. Now that's a great incentive for me, for that type of person, but it's not applicable to all. So you're having to find those triggers that are relevant and appropriate to you, that triggers a sustained behavioural change. And that's what incentives are doing. And they need to be short-term incentives, but also long-term incentives. And that's how we then evolved our program into the shared value insurance model, where, you know, customers will feel, or members will feel an immediate benefit of prevention, obviously, but that has to manifest then through other rewards, such as lower renewal premiums or cashbacks or something else, in order to keep engaged.
And I think that kind of, it's something that I've noticed as you've been talking to me this morning. You've mentioned a lot of different partners, people you've worked with. How fundamental is that to the Prevention 2.0 model? Because obviously we've all seen stories of firms trying to be everything for everyone themselves, and most oftentimes it doesn't work. It's overreaching. But obviously, as you've kind of demonstrated here, you've partnered with a lot of different providers, different firms, different data specialists in different areas. So how core is that to that Prevention 2.0?
Absolutely. You know, right in the beginning, we clearly identified that the true art of strategic relationships with your partners is vital. And if I look at our managing director of the Vitality Program, and Nick's ability to find these partners, our digital team to assess them properly, my clinical provider team, the sourcing team, to truly forge and build those relationships is imperative. But we need to also integrate into our data, but more importantly, have the activity-based rewards or the incentive rewards built into their programs as well. So it's not just a standalone bolt-on. Those standalone bolt-ons, we've tried a couple. They're not sustainable in our view. Yeah, maybe we just haven't found the right partner yet, but I think we're doing all right.
Now, another question touches on something you've mentioned earlier, and then indeed Carl did earlier, when he's talking about our awareness of what we should do, but what we do not do. And he said, you know, we all supposed to do a number of steps, and for most people, eating those 5 fruit and veg a day is probably the one that most people fall down on. Yep. It's something simple, but something we still don't do. So the question is, do you think there's going to be further incentives in future focused on this particular area around nutrition and healthy food, rather than, say, the more physical side, such as gyms or cycling, for example?
So, you know, we've looked at healthy food for years, and as a collective and as a global group, and it is the one key challenge. That and stress and sleep are the 3 areas which still a lot of work needs to be done on. We launched and partnered with Waitrose, our healthy food benefit, and it's been fascinating to see that, you know, 67% of those purchases of their basket, in their basket, 67% of the contents are healthy food. And that's through signposting. When you go down the aisles, it's got a little banner on it. It tells you what's healthy food, tells you what's good to eat. And then you partner with Mindful Chef, which give you the recipes. So, you know, you need to close the loop on all of that. But the big play, which you know, and again, lack of evidence, but genetic makeup. And, you know, as a clinician and talking to people about diets, you know, how many diets are out there? High fat, low fat, high carbs, low, you know, and we're all different. And I think we're all going to reflect back in 10 years' time and say, actually, on this genetic makeup, this should have been the diet for you. Or these are the types of foods that really agree with you and are good for you. And so, you know, there's a whole lot of incredible, exciting stuff happening in that field. And so healthy food, nutrition remains on our roadmap and a key part of our program.
And I think it's probably something we can all relate to, isn't it? As you say, you can signpost people in a shop, for example. You can give them everything they need, but to make them take that step between they going to the fridge, taking this out and actually consuming it is a whole different challenge, I suppose. And I think one, again, we can probably all relate to at one stage or another, but it's a fascinating conundrum, I suppose. But anyway, sorry, Keith, we've now run out of time for our session, but thank you very much for joining us and sharing your insights into Prevention 2.0, and it's something obviously we at Cover will be keeping a very close eye on going forward.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.